Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special event with our guest speaker, Professor Venkataraman from India, who will be giving an address to us this evening. We particularly think tonight of our Muslim brothers and sisters. We are very close at the Interfaith Centre of Melbourne to the Islamic Council of Victoria and the imams who work very hard towards peace. And we know at this time that there is a difficult situation in the world through people who would really want to incite violence. And so we stand by our brothers and sisters who are working very hard for peace in the wider Australian community. I would now like to invite Auntie Helen Bernads, who is a board member of the Interfaith Centre of Melbourne and an Indigenous elder of the Aboriginal community in Melbourne, to offer the welcome and acknowledgement of country. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As we gather on this sacred land, let us together acknowledge that we are standing on country for which the Aboriginal nations of Australia and their ancestors have been custodians for thousands of years, land on which the Kulin nations have performed age-old ceremonies, celebrations, initiations and renewals. They are the Kulin nations of the Wurundjeri, the Bunurong, the Tainarong, the Djarurong, and also the Wathaurong groups. We acknowledge their living culture here in Melbourne and Victoria, and their unique role in the life of this area of Melbourne, Victoria. We acknowledge their elders, past and present. Thank you.
And now on this United Nations International Day of Peace, I would like to invite Mr. Graham Hunter, who is the President of the United Nations Association in Australia in the Victorian Division, who is going to introduce to us our guest speaker tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Good evening, everyone. It's an enormous pleasure to be asked to introduce tonight's speaker. Each year, the International Day of Peace is observed around the world on the 21st of September. The United Nations General Assembly has declared that this day should be devoted to strengthening the ideals of peace, both within and among all nations and peoples. The theme for this year's observance is Sustainable Peace for a Sustainable Future. Interestingly, this follows a global conference that was organised by the United Nations earlier this year, at which representatives of virtually all national governments, civil society and the private sector came together to renew commitment to long-term sustainable development. There can be no sustainable future without sustainable peace. As the Secretary-General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, says, armed conflict attacks the very pillars of sustainable development. Natural resources must be used for the benefit of society, not to finance wars. It was my privilege to attend that conference together with 14 other delegates from the United Nations Association of Australia. There's a United Nations Association in most countries, and many were formed soon after the United Nations itself was established. Their mission is to promote and to support the ideals and work of the UN. And we do this through a wide range of activities about which, if you're interested, you can learn from our website. And we'd very much welcome your involvement. Having said that, and having directed our attention to the theme of this year's International Day of Peace, it now gives me enormous pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, who will be challenging us with the question, can science and spirituality come together to promote world peace? Professor Venkataraman commenced his career in 1955 as a scientist at the Bhabha Atomic Research Centre in Mumbai. In 1973, he was appointed director of several key departments within the Indira Gandhi Centre for Atomic Research. In 1987, he founded the Advanced Numerical Analysis and Research Group at the request of the Defence Research and Development Organisation. Following his retirement as a distinguished scientist in 1992, he served as Vice-Chancellor of the Sri Sathya Sai University in India. The university aims to impart integral education. In this, the development of character is considered the primary objective of education. As a writer, the professor has specialised in both science and spirituality. He's authored papers on neutron scattering, some aspects of condensed matter physics, for those of you who know what condensed matter physics is, and of material science, all of which have been published in international journals. His 14 books entitled Vignettes in Physics were intended as part of a series to popularise science amongst all those interested, both young and old. In addition, he's written 2 monographs and a major internationally acclaimed scientific biography of Sir C.V. Raman, who was the first Indian to win the Nobel Prize for Physics. More recently, he's published books relating to spirituality. He's served as president, council member and fellow of several scientific academies and associations in India. He's received many academic awards and honours throughout his distinguished career, and in 2004 he was awarded the Padma Shri, which is awarded by the President of India, similar to our Order of Australia. Could you please welcome our distinguished speaker?
I feel deeply humbled and also highly elevated to be in this beautiful ambience of the church. And I'm also grateful to the musicians for providing the right start for this day when we try to think about peace and examine how we can really have peace. In a sense, the musicians have already pointed out the answer. Peace is not outside. Peace has to be experienced through the heart and the mind. I'm grateful for the kind introduction given to me. And he said, I'm going to start by asking a question which is there in the first slide. I'm tempted to ask this question because, as we all know and as was just now pointed out, the United Nations was formed in the year 1944, just before the war ended. War ended, World War II that is, in 1945. And since then, we have passed through many decades. The United Nations, it was hoped, would end wars forever, but wars and conflicts have not ended at all. There are grim statistics about the number of millions of lives lost, but I shall not go into them. For me, the issue is, why is it that peace is still eluding us? Not merely that, can there be any way to really achieve peace, for which we all prayed just now? And I am asking that question through this question. My talk is divided into 3 parts. To start with, I shall give a very brief overview of how the universe looks to a person interested in spirituality. I will then take the complementary view how for science which deals with the material and phenomenal universe, there is something beyond science. Is there something beyond science? It appears to be. I'll be dealing with that question. Then I will come to the world of the mind and heart, to which there was a reference made. And lastly, I will say, unless the mind and the heart are brought together in balanced proportion, as was already hinted in the song, we cannot have peace. And it is useful to remember, all faiths implicitly agree on this. And at least at the level of the quest for peace, all faiths have a common meeting point. Now, let me begin with a few minutes devoted to ancient philosophy. Next slide, please. Philosophy in ancient times had three intertwined strands: the religious strand, the moral strand, and strand related to nature. And thus there was religious philosophy, moral philosophy, and natural philosophy. You didn't talk of three kinds of philosophers. There was only one kind of philosopher who worried about all these things. And there is a reason why I'm making this point. And by way of introducing that point, let me call for the next slide. According to modern science, our universe, the universe in which we live, began with an event which is referred to as a Big Bang. It does not mean that there was an explosion, but it refers to an event, a very remarkable event that occurred exactly 13.8 billion years ago, give or take a few million years. We know this very precisely from science. When time and space came into existence, subsequently space expanded as time flowed, and that is what we refer to as expansion of the universe. And in this universe emerged matter, inert matter, which includes all these material things, including this stuff that I am holding in my hand. But there also emerged living beings. Science addresses these two aspects of evolution. That's the way science is constituted. It doesn't bother about something that we all know exists. Our ability to be conscious of our environment, the fact that we have a conscience in our mind, or rather in our heart, and the fact that there is a consciousness or awareness spread everywhere. Those are matters that concern philosophers and people interested in spirituality. Right now, there is a red line here. People in this domain don't bother about this, people in this domain don't bother about this. We can't be like that if we want to have peace, because peace concerns the world, and the source of peace lies in the third strand. Now, let me go to the next slide. This is the approach that philosophers take. They start from consciousness and come to the material world. Consciousness is primordial for philosophy because even Western scientists now accept this. I'll come to that later. But for the time being, I would request you to bear with me and accept the equivalence between spirituality, spiritual, ultimate essence of spiritual philosophy and consciousness. There is a scenario in which you can understand the materialization of consciousness into a material phenomenal universe in which there is evolution of matter, life, awareness, etc. Can I have the next slide, please? The scientist is concerned with the physics of the universe, and very soon I'll be talking about this. This quest to understand the universe has taken them to almost a doorstep of metaphysics and consciousness. This was totally unanticipated. The scientists are faced with questions which make them wonder, is there a consciousness? And it looks like it is there. So, we seem to be coming from two ends together. And if we meet and take the right decisions, we may even have peace. That's going to be my, what you call, the essence of my talk. Now, let me quickly go through the viewpoint of the philosopher, spiritual philosopher, about the emergence of the physical universe and the evolution of inert matter and life in it. That is done in the next few slides. I start with abstract pure consciousness, which exists even if the universe does not. But before the universe is to be prepared, this consciousness cascades down to a certain, what you might call, preparatory level. If I were to use the language of physics, I would simply say this. Big Bang kicked off the universe, but there's so much of matter in the universe, and it needs energy. You can't just have energy appearing from nowhere. It has to come from somewhere. If you have currency, somebody must have printed the currency. So where did this energy come from? Science is not able to answer that because it cannot go beyond as it is now, beyond the Big Bang. They have very many hypotheses. They say there is an energy bank from which this has been drawn. A spiritual philosopher will say that energy bank is pure consciousness prepared to a level from which the Big Bang could occur. If moment you accept that, then it is, next slide please, you can accept this is the consciousness, all pervasive, universe evolves into galaxies, stars and so forth. Next slide please. We go one step further and come to planet Earth, in which life emerged in a very primitive form, went through animal forms, went through apes, and finally we have the human as we see them today, barely 100,000 years ago. Next slide, please. And all this is flowering of consciousness, according to spiritual philosophy. And here you see modern man's, and all these pictures show his achievements. Obviously, recognize this as a part of Australia. I couldn't find an iconic symbol of Melbourne, otherwise I would have put it in here. I apologize for that. But anyway, it's Australia, and so you should be happy. The point is, we don't realize how much this consciousness has flowered in us to be able to make us achieve all these great things. And yet, we are struggling for peace. I shall come to that in a minute. Meanwhile, I would like you to travel back a few centuries and reflect on what this Sufi saint, Jalaluddin Rumi, was born in what is modern Iran. Not in modern Iran, in modern Central Asia. He was actually a Persian poet and spent the later years of his life in Turkey, because that was all part of the Persian Empire at that time. And he has a very beautiful poem which is there. It says, I died a mineral and became a plant. I died a plant and became an animal. I died an animal and I was a man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die as a man to soar with the blessed angels. But even from angelhood I must pass on. All except God perishes. When I have sacrificed my angel soul, I shall become that which no mind has ever conceived. Oh, let me not exist, for non-existence proclaims, to him we shall return. Essentially, Rumi is paraphrasing the evolution of consciousness in the material world. It is said that consciousness sleeps in a stone, stirs in a plant, awakens in an animal, and flowers in a human being. This flowering I showed in an earlier slide via material achievements. But there is a higher level of flowering of human consciousness when humans behave like humans, when they become compassionate, when they become understanding, when they start helping each other. Because it is at that level you become a saint and become closer to God. And it is at that level we can find peace. To put it very simply, the ultimate in evolution is to rise from the level of the mind to the level of the heart. And that is my pitch. Now, I go to a discussion of what scientists think of this. I have to mention this because scientists are seen as hardcore people, hard-boiled eggs, who don't bother about spirituality, who thinks it's a complete waste of time. It's actually a racket to make money and so on and so forth. I show in the next slide a picture of Erwin Schrödinger of Austria. This is when he lived. Schrödinger is one of the three founding fathers of modern quantum mechanics. He made a very important seminal contribution in the year 1926, and he shared the Nobel Prize for quantum mechanics. Being a Jew, he escaped He wanted to run away from Austria because Hitler was coming to power, and particularly from Austria. He sought refuge in Ireland and stayed there till the end of the war. In fact, he did not come back to Ireland, to Austria, till the Russians quit Austria. And in the University of Dublin in the year 1944, Schrödinger gave 4 lectures on what is life. Later, these lectures were collected and printed by the University of Cambridge. And this is the cover of that book. Of course, some other material was included in that. Now, as a physicist, Schrödinger asked 2 questions in his lectures. First question was, how does the human body work? And the next question was, is that all there is to the human body, a living body, person? As far as the first question was concerned, Schrödinger was the first person to brilliantly analyze and say the human body is like a refrigerator. In what sense? You have a certain temperature in the room. It's a room temperature, but you have a fridge. You open the fridge, you have ice cold condition, defreezer condition. So there's an engine that puts this system at a state which is outside of equilibrium. It's in a non-equilibrium state. That's the technical language we use. The human body is a system which is in a non-equilibrium state. Why? Because my body temperature always tries to be at a certain level, whether I'm here or there. Of course, I try to help it with the help of clothes and so on and so forth. But this engine is trying to keep me at that fixed temperature. It is defying equilibrium. And Schrödinger says, death is nothing but a body returning to a state of equilibrium with its surroundings. That's all there is to the thermodynamics of the body. But he also said something. Is the body just an engine, like a fridge? No, it's a conscious engine, because if I want to sit up, I sit down, I sit down. If I want to get up, I get up. This is not describable by the laws of physics. Therefore, he said, life is a combination of what you may call biophysics, biochemistry and all that, and consciousness. He dared to say it for the first time. I show in this slide a picture of George Wald, professor of chemistry in Harvard University. He was interested in the chemical reactions that take place in the eye that help us to make us see things, the chemistry of sight and vision. And for this contribution, he won the Nobel Prize, I think in medicine some year. George Wald was equally interested in the evolution of life and things like that. And he said, I hate to say it, I don't like to say it as a scientist, but the fact is I have to admit, the universe is born from consciousness. His exact word was, it is the view, just the contrary of consciousness appearing as a late outgrowth of evolution of life on this and other planets, that this universe breeds life and consciousness because consciousness is its source. Because the stuff of this universe is ultimately mind stuff, as he called it. Consciousness, he called it mind stuff. And he says what we see in evolution is a flowering of this consciousness, as Rumi described. And he says the human being is the ultimate avatar, because it is in humans you see such achievements as art, literature, and science. But as I pointed out, there is one more milestone for humans to cross, that of humanness. Now let me come to the philosophical issues science is facing. And in order to describe this, I would have to go to the next slide. At the top, you see a cannon being fired and a ball falling here. This symbolizes the essence of classical physics, which was founded by Sir Isaac Newton. Newton gave us laws of mechanics and also rules for calculating motion, provided you know what is called the initial conditions. In the case of the cannon, the initial conditions are its position and its velocity. So classical mechanics, you assume I know the position of an object, I know its velocity, then I can calculate everything. Whole of ballistics, planetary motion, all these things can be calculated. In fact, Newton was able to calculate the motion of all planets for the first time, using this and the law of gravitation. It was a huge milestone. And the laws of Newton and the mechanics of Newton were perfected in the next 2 centuries. And at the end of the 19th century, it looked as if classical mechanics had triumphed. There was nothing left to do. The rest was all chemistry, so it was believed. The essential paradigm of classical mechanics is that it is deterministic. You can calculate, there is a cause and there is an effect. That is what determinism really means. But starting in 1896, when J.J. Thomson discovered the electron, and then radioactivity was discovered by Becquerel, and so many things happened within the next 20 years, physics became destabilized for the reason that Newton's laws didn't work there. Some other kind of mechanics was needed, and that came into existence between 1925 and 1928, thanks to 3 people, Werner Heisenberg in Germany, Erwin Schrödinger of Austria, whom I already mentioned, and Paul Dirac in Cambridge, England. Together, they created the modern edifice of modern quantum mechanics. In what way is the paradigm of quantum mechanics different from that of classical mechanics? That is shown here. I have here an electron gun, which is imitating the cannon, except that this deals with the microscopic world, because the electron is a microscopic particle. So many of you will remember the old TV sets which had a screen and a big thing like this. At the end of it was an electron gun which was painting the screen with the TV images. You may not know it, but there was an electron gun doing work for you and bringing you news and non-news and nonsense. That electron is just like the cannonball, except that it is very tiny, very, very tiny. But if you apply Newton's laws to that electron, it doesn't obey. It says, I don't want Newton, I want something else. Why is it? Because nature has made the electron into something which is both a particle and a wave. We can't understand this. So don't try to ask me to explain it. Then I will ask for a whole day, which you don't want. Just accept that there is a certain duality in nature in the microscopic world where both particles and light are concerned. And you cannot explain it unless you take a probabilistic approach to nature. And that is what quantum mechanics is. In other words, I cannot describe the outcome of individual events. There is no cause and effect. But if I do a lot of experiments, on the average, I can predict what is the outcome. And on the average, the electron will go just like Newton's law. But in any individual event, it's something I cannot predict definitely. So in other words, the paradigm of physics has changed from deterministic to probabilistic. Now, what has this got to do with spirituality, metaphysics and all that? That is what I shall explain in the next few minutes. 2 people became very deeply interested in the physics of quantum mechanics, or rather the philosophy of quantum mechanics. One was Albert Einstein, who made a discovery which is very seminal and ushered in the quantum era. Other was Niels Bohr, who made a similar contribution. Both of them won the Nobel Prize. Now Einstein said, quantum mechanics is it's a working rule, but I distrust it very severely because it is counterintuitive. It doesn't accept the deterministic aspect of nature. And I don't believe in this. And also quantum mechanics says there are only observables that are relevant for physical reality, which means there must be an observer. And only if there is an observer, there is physical reality. Einstein was revolted. He said, do you mean to say there is no moon when I don't look at it? This is nonsense. And he had fierce public debates with Niels Bohr over 2 years. This debate used to take place in conferences. Einstein said quantum mechanics is an accidental tool. It works. That's not the way nature is. Tomorrow some bright physicist will discover what it is. God does not play dice. And he said, subtle is the Lord, but malicious he is not. And in Princeton University, where he took refuge, running away from Hitler, they have got this engraved, I am told somewhere. Subtle is the Lord, but malicious he is not. Niels Bohr said, I am sorry, but this is the way nature is. It is dual in the microscopic world. Whether you like it or not, you have to accept it. 1936, the clouds of war began to, 1930, people began to migrate. Lots of scientists from Eastern Europe and Germany fled the clutches of Hitler and took refuge in England and in America. Einstein went to America, and there he found some peace, at least for working. And in 1936, he wrote a paper along with two colleagues. Next slide, please. Podolsky and Rosen here. Essentially, it was a paper where a thought experiment was done called Gedanken experiment, where two particles that are tied to each other start flying away. They go like far away. And Einstein says, if I observe this, your quantum mechanics says that particle is disturbed. This is nonsense. They are far away. How can that be disturbed? Especially when they are billions of miles, kilometers away. How will information go instantly from here to there? Your quantum mechanics says, when I observe this, that will be disturbed. That's the uncertainty principle of Heisenberg. This is counterintuitive, nonsense. Your quantum mechanics is not adequate. You need something else. Bohr saw this from Copenhagen. He wrote a rebuttal. Einstein was not convinced. He said, you are essentially telling me information will go in a fraction of a second from here to there. That violates special relativity. It cannot be true because special relativity has been validated. E equals mc squared is a part of special relativity, by the way. It has been proved in the laboratory. How can you say it's not valid? The debate rested there. 1936, war clouds began to gather, and war was fought between 1939 and 45. Nobody bothered about this debate. It was put in the cold storage. After 1945, the physicists came back from the trenches, and they had a lot of money. America poured a lot of money into science because it was rewarded with the atom bomb and the radar. And that was the time when you got money just for the asking. And so physicists had a grand time spending government money doing all sorts of things. Who bothered about this debate about Einstein, between Einstein and Bohr? Hardly anyone. But in the year 1980, next slide please, this physicist in France did the very experiment that Einstein called for. And the outcome was Einstein was wrong. Which meant that Bohr was right. Which meant that these two particles far away were somehow communicating with each other instantly. It's not easy for me to describe all that, but let me give you a very simple, homely analogy. Let us say there are twins. Obviously, the twins were together in their mother's womb. They were born. Let us say in later life, these twins got separated and one of them went to Montreal and the other was, say, in Melbourne. Both start with the letter M. That's why I chose Montreal and Melbourne. Let's say for some reason, I know there's a big time difference, but let's say for some reason, the Montreal twin is sitting in on a chair like me, and so is the twin in Melbourne. I'm not the Melbourne twin, though I am sitting on a chair. Let's say the Montreal twin falls down from the chair. He's sleeping, falls down. This fellow is disturbed in Melbourne, he also falls down. You will say that's an accident, coincidence. But this experiment says, no, it's not a coincidence. There's a quantum entanglement between the two. That was the discovery. And this was something that was difficult to understand. Nobody expected this. It was a bolt from the blue. As aspect says, events in one part of the universe are connected through some kind of a mysterious quantum entanglement with events everywhere, even if that spot is far away. So question arose. Next slide, please. How does one understand physical reality in the context of a subtle and universal connectivity that seemed to underlie the whole of cosmos? Nobody had thought of the universe as one unit. Universe is made up of bits and pieces like this, and so on. But now you say, no. This may appear to be different from this, but this and this are connected. You and I are connected, and so on. This was very puzzling, and a lot of people began to think about this and make various comments. In the next few slides, take you through these comments. Next slide, please. This is John Gribbin, hardcore physicist. He says, the result of the EPR aspect experiment tells us that particles that were once together in an interaction remain in some sense part of a single system which responds together in further interactions. He's just reiterating. And he adds, next slide. Virtually everything we see and touch and feel is made up of collections of particles that have been involved in interactions with other particles right through the Big Bang. Because even though we are separate, even though we quarrel about all sorts of things, all of us came from one Big Bang, at least at the scientific level. Whether we have come from God or not, we came from the Big Bang. So we were united together. Today we are different. But this difference is superficial. Even science says that. Next slide, please. Paul Davies, another physicist, very brilliant. He says, the universe is not a collection of objects, but an inseparable web of patterns in which no one component has reality independent from the entirety. Included in the entirety is the observer. Next slide, please. Gary Zukov, a philosopher, he says, the physical world according to quantum mechanics is built out of independently existing structures, independently existing unanalyzable entities, rather a web of relationship as a whole. Next slide, please. This is Jeffrey Chu, a hardcore Berkeley physicist doing particle physics. He talks more precisely. He says, your electron and mine are only approximately indistinguishable. In denying objective reality that Einstein vehemently stood by, quantum mechanics denies absolute status to your individuality. The only individual is the entire universe. And that's a very powerful statement coming from a physicist. Just to make you feel more comfortable, I'd like to change the gear and make you feel homely with the next slide. It is appropriate we remember him on at least this day. He said in 1931, in a spiritual message to the world recorded in England, where he was for political negotiation with the British government, he said, it's a very beautiful message. It can be heard even today if you go to the YouTube and click on, ask for or Google in Gandhi's spiritual message 1931. Very beautiful, 6 minutes. It came out as a gramophone record, Columbia gramophone record. We used to have it in our house, 78 RPM. I've heard it many times. And in that Gandhi says, sense perceptions can be and often are false and deceptive. There is a reason why I draw attention to this, because when I say this and this are different, I'm using my senses. That's what my senses tell me, eyes, ears, nose and all that. When we do science, we hardly realize that we are really using instruments which are nothing but extensions of my senses. Galileo invented the telescope. What is a telescope? It is a gadget that allows me to see longer distances than my eye can see. What is a microscope? It's a gadget that allows me to see objects that are too small for the eye to see. It's just an extension of the senses. Similarly, we have gadgets that allow us to detect the infrared, ultraviolet. Eye can see only certain range, but there is radiation, radio. That's nothing but an electromagnetic wave. I have instruments that can detect. The whales operate in the subsonic region. I can't hear a subsonic, but I have instruments to do it. So every instrument is nothing but an extension of senses. So when I do science, I'm really extending my senses, nothing more. It is part of sense perception, and Gandhi says sense perception can be false and deceptive. And to drive home the point, I show the next slide, which shows 5 blind men exploring the elephant. None of them can see the elephant, and they describe it in different ways, as you all know from the famous story. Science is doing just that, and discovering the empirical facts connected with diversity. But aspects experiment shows behind this diversity, there is a unity. Even science is saying that. Now, just to change the gear again, I would like to show the next slide, which shows Robert Young, who was a hardcore aeronautical engineer in Princeton. He got many awards for designing rocket engines for NASA. He accidentally stayed into study of parakinetics and began to first distrust it. He said, I don't believe in this business of mind influencing matter. It's a lot of hocus pocus. Let me prove it by doing an experiment. And for this purpose, next slide please, he built a machine, piece of hardware called the Random Event Generator, REG. He put it on a table like this and asked volunteers to come and sit on a chair, meditate on the machine and say, "Oh, random machine, stop behaving randomly." I mean, this looks like a absolutely foolish thing to do, but a lot of people were willing to do because he paid them $5 an hour. And graduate students are always short of money, so there was no shortage of volunteers. Some of them took the works very seriously, they were very conscientious. And lo and behold, very often the machine behaved in a manner that was different from pure randomness. There was a non-random behavior. This fellow distrusted his experiment. Most of the time, of course, it was random. But later on, he found that when he applied all sorts of statistical controls and things like that, it was still behaving non-randomly occasionally. So he asked himself the question, why is it this experiment is not reproducible? Sometimes I get a result, sometimes I don't get a result. He came to the conclusion, he got a result whenever the people were really focused. The other people were not, they were probably thinking of their girlfriends or boyfriends as the case may be. And that's why he got what you may call a different result. He then became convinced that mind-matter interaction can take place. Now, doctors know this already because the mind in a person can interact with the body. That is fine. But here, the mind outside was interacting with inert matter. In the 60s, there used to be a person from Israel known as Uri Geller, who was very famous on television, was supposed to be able to bend spoons, metal spoons. And that person appeared on TV shows and all that. I don't know whether it was proved to be a fake or not. But Robert Young, for the first time, said, I guarantee you the human mind can affect inert matter. Today, a philosopher will say that's no big deal. Human being is conscious. That has got consciousness also, though it is sleeping. It can interact. If one charge can interact with another charge through electromagnetic field, why can't one conscious being interact with another conscious being even though it is separate? A physicist will say, aha, you are not separate, you are already entangled through quantum mechanics. So you see, we are slowly coming to some kind of a new frontier where we have to change our thinking. And the next slide very quickly takes you through 3 points of view. One due to David Bohm, a brilliant physicist, an American who had to escape to England to escape the witch hunt in America that began in the 1950s, early 50s, due to Senator Joe McCarthy. Carl Pribram, a neuroscientist in Stanford University. This man was in England, I don't know which college, Imperial College or King's College. And Stanislav Grof, a Czechoslovak doctor who immigrated to America and became involved in studies in psychology. Let me start with Bohm. Bohm worked with Denis Gabor, who discovered holography, for which he got the Nobel Prize. Bohm was already involved in the studies of quantum mechanics, and he wrote very seminal papers, Bohm-Arnav effect, to unravel its subtleties. And he realized, after the Allen aspect experiment, this universe is connected, but our perception is fragmented. And he said this is like a hologram. You all know, must have heard about a hologram. These days it's in the passport and all that. If you see a hologram, you won't see something properly. But if you hold it in light, laser light, coherent light, you will see the object of the hologram. So there is what you may call limited perception and total perception. And Bohm said scientists are seeing fragmented things basically because the universe is a hologram and their instruments are not able to look at the total of physical reality. All this is connected with the issue of physical reality, which bothered both Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr. So Reality is something that is of deep concern to physicists also, not just philosophers. Carl Pribram, he was interested in neural networks in the brain. He did the mathematics of the neural networks, and he was stunned to find that this mathematics was identical to the mathematics of quantum mechanics written by von Neumann, very famous. He was the man who gave us the computer, the modern computer. He was a polymath, a great genius. And he was stunned. The brain is a hologram, said Carl Pribram. And next step was taken by Grof, who went beyond the brain to the mind. Philosophers talk of mind as something subtle and not just this meat machine, as Francis Crick referred to the brain. The mind, he said, is a conscious entity which can operate at two levels, that of seeing diversity and that of seeing totality. And the next slide very quickly takes you through Bohm, Pribram, through Grof, to two modes in which consciousness can operate. The hylotropic mode where you see diversity and the holotropic mode where you see universality. And for completeness, I point out here that Buddhist and Vedantic philosophy also refer to consciousness and awareness at being at two levels. The lower level in which we operate when we are awake, the higher level to which we go if we are immersed deep in deep transcendental meditation. At that level, we forget diversity, we experience unity. The next slide expresses this through a graphic. This is the hylotropic mode of Stanislav Grof. And here's a person whose mind is wandering in the world. He sees diversity and his senses are attracted to this diversity. And to emphasize that it's the senses that feed the mind, I have put images from Las Vegas. That is the ultimate in sensual attraction. So that's diversity. Incidentally, this morning my host, Dr. Raman Koshal, took me to a casino. So for the first time I saw what a casino was. I went with empty pockets, so there was no problem. And here you see the same universe and a man meditating, and he is directly able to rise above this diversity and connect with pure consciousness. This is the holotropic mode that was postulated by Prof. To make this concept simple, I show the next slide. You see a white light, sun ray. Students do this. For the first time, this was explained by Newton. Light taken through a prism splits into 7 colors. So the question is sunlight white or is it 7 colors? Well, it depends on whether you are on this side or this side. If we allow our senses to dominate, we are on this side and we see diversity in unity. If you are on this side, we see unity in diversity. So, these are complementary aspects. That is what we should keep in mind. Incidentally, this issue of quantum mechanics and philosophy coming together has been discussed in detail, next slide please, in a book called The Quantum and the Lotus. I mention this because those of you who wish to pursue this further can buy this book and it's easily available. If you go to Amazon, you can locate it. This book is a dialogue. It's a dialogue between two people, Matthew Ricard, a French scientist, molecular biologist who turned a Buddhist monk and now lives in Kathmandu. So he is the spiritual representative of spirituality in this dialogue. And the other is a Vietnamese, Trinh Xuan Thuan. He went to Paris, studied astrophysics, and he is a physicist. So Frenchman who turned a monk and a Buddhist who turned a scientist. So they are dialoguing with each other. It's a very interesting, I've got the book with me and I plan to read it on my way back home to India. And this is the scientist and the physicist, philosopher looking at the universe from their points of view. And the book ends with 2 short essays. The monk looking at the science and the scientist looking at spirituality. I don't know whether they agree or disagree. I have to read the book to find out. But now, I wish to wrap up the talk very quickly, and I would like to show this slide, which features Victor Weisskopf. He is very important in the context of peace for the following reason. He is a brilliant Austrian physicist who escaped to America in the 30s, mid-30s. During the war, he worked on the atom bomb. He was a brilliant physicist. He worked on the atom bomb. But after the war, he was devastated by the destructive power of the atom bomb and turned a pacifist. He was a distinguished professor of physics in MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Very cultured man, very refined man. And in an address to the American Association for the Advancement of Science, he said he made this statement which caught my attention and has remained imprinted ever since. He says, human existence is based upon two pillars, scientific knowledge and compassion. Compassion without knowledge is ineffective. I know that because I've seen many villages in India who are very compassionate, but they can't transform society. They are not at all empowered. But knowledge without compassion can be inhumane, because you can make the atom bomb, you can make the hydrogen bomb, you can make the neutron bomb, you can make the biological bomb. So you need both knowledge and compassion, and they must be in balanced proportion. So if you are really talking of a world where there will be peace, the house of humanity should be, as in the next slide, where knowledge and compassion form two pillars, righteousness forms the foundation, and a ceiling on desires is needed. We can't go on endlessly on this consumerist mode because we are going to destroy the planet. We have already done so. So this is the idealistic picture of the house of humanity, at least as I see it. And now let me bring in the United Nations, for after all, are we not gathered on using that as an excuse? Next slide, please. This is a picture taken at the time of the Millennium Summit in the year 2000, when all the world leaders gathered, pondered, and then they identified 8 subjects as needing their immediate attention. Next slide, please. Millennium Development Goals. It goes all the way from eradicating poverty and hunger to global partnership and development, in between improve maternal health, reduce child mortality, etc. Curiously, there is no reference to finding peace. I suppose they left it to the Security Council. Now, next slide, please. This shows Jeffrey Sachs, a professor of economics in Columbia University, a brilliant intellectual. I got to know about him when he gave 5 lectures, BBC Wraith lectures. These are lectures endowed by the BBC in honor of Lord Wraith, who founded BBC long time ago. And these lectures are held in different parts of the world. They start from London and end in London, but in between they go around the world. Brilliant set of lectures, they are available in the web. You can hear the audio, you get the transcript. But I'm drawing attention to this because in these lectures, Sachs identified 3 major problems facing humanity. One is conflict, terrorism, and war. Second is climate change, and third is mass poverty. He does a great job in identifying the problems, but does very poorly when it comes to solutions. There's a reason for it, which I shall point out very shortly. The next slide shows a maze. Why do I show a maze? Because, when you are caught in a maze, it's not very easy to come out. And the next slide shows humanity caught in a maze. But take a look at the next slide. Here you see a person going through the maze, doesn't know whether to come out or how to come out. But here's a bird. You put the bird in a maze, it's going to fly out. It has no problem at all. Now what's the idea that I'm trying to hint at? It's simply this. We are trying to solve problems at a certain level. If we want solution, we must get out of this level to a different level. Now what is that level? And to set the stage for that, I would like to show the next slide, which again features David Bohm, whom I mentioned earlier. David Bohm has written a book, Thought as a System. And in that book he says, this is the key sentence, thought is constantly creating problems that way, and then trying to solve them. But as it tries to solve them, it makes it worse because it does not notice that it is creating them, and the more it thinks, the more the problem it creates. In simple terms, the mind is very good at doing fantastic things where science and technology are concerned. But when it comes to human affairs, mind is very good at creating problems, but not solving them. And so, how does the mind thwart peace? That is summarized in the next slide. This is stating the obvious, but yet it has to be stated on this day. The mind is easily infected by desire, anger, greed, jealousy, selfishness, etc. This is no news. It is desire, anger, prejudice, and so on that lead to conflicts. That also is no news. These conflicts could be due to religious, ethnic, racial, and all kinds of factors apart from the desire to dominate. And conflicts seem insoluble because the mind is seldom able to rise above selfishness. It's not a conflicts alone. Look at climate change. They met at Copenhagen. There were conflicts due to self-interest and selfishness of different countries. America wanted it one way. China and India wanted it another way. Other countries want it in a third way. Nobody wants to solve the problems. They want to protect that turf. And it becomes a turf war. So each is trapped here. Instead of individuals, you have nations or regional groups. Solution created by the mind where conflicts are concerned lead to absence of conflict and not peace. And the next two slides show the trap in which we are caught. Next slide. This is a picture of the Hiroshima mushroom cloud. This is a picture taken in East Europe. You see this graffiti. We want peace. How can we have peace when we are loaded with atom bombs? Next slide, please. This shows Sri Sathya Sai Baba, who was my spiritual mentor and guru. And I am showing a slide because I want to call attention to an important statement he made, which is relevant to us. It's in the next slide. In this slide, this is a picture of Hiroshima, real photograph. This is a mushroom cloud, a real photograph. This is the thirst for peace, real photograph, all put in juxtaposition. Why? Because I want to draw attention to what Baba said. He said, these days it has become a fashion to pray for peace. Keeping the atom bomb in hand, people shout for peace. Even by journeying to the moon, man cannot get peace. Peace is within you, not on the moon. It is better to travel half an inch into the heart than to journey hundreds of thousands of miles to the moon. We heard that in the song. Peace is not outside. And there was a reference to peace coming through the blending of the mind and the heart. So already what I am going to say was said in song and poetry, but I gave a long talk. And the next slide draws attention in a qualitative way, the graphic. This is the body, this is the mind. It creates a lot of problems. But the heart can solve, because when you rise above from the level of the mind to the level of the heart, you become compassionate. You become less selfish. You don't have so many self-interests. So, as was said in the song, the mind and the heart alone can lead us to peace. I would now like to end the talk by showing you this slide. In India, the word for peace is Shanti. That's a Sanskrit word. But there is also another word called Prashanti. So one day Baba asked his students, Shanti means peace, Prashanti means peace. What's the difference? They could not tell. And he gave a very beautiful and simple example. He said, look at a flower. The flower is beautiful. That beauty is innate to that flower. That is peace, Shanti. But the flower has got a fragrance. And even though you may not be able to see the flower, you can feel its presence because of the fragrance. That is Prashanti. So the long and short of it is, if I am at peace, as we were asked to in the meditation, then I radiate peace, which envelops others. They become peaceful. So if we want to spread peace, the first thing is, I have to be peaceful. I can't be going around shouting peace, 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 peace and all that. It doesn't work. It goes to pieces. I have to feel at peace with myself. Then when I'm at peace with myself, I'll be at peace with others. And automatically that will calm down the temperature. And now if everybody starts doing this, you will get a real peace. Now, what is the role you and I have got to play in this? I have to say a few words about that, and I shall do that with this next slide, which features Eugene Wigner of Hungary. He trained as a chemical engineer, and that would make our distinguished Master of Ceremonies happy, because he is a chemical engineer. Wigner was also a brilliant physicist. He went to America, and he also was the founding father of the theory of physical nuclear reactors. He wrote a monograph, Wigner and Weinberg, the physics of nuclear reactors, I think it's called. It's not been surpassed to this day. He won the Nobel Prize for Physics. He said, mathematics is too important to be left to mathematicians. That was his famous statement as far as I'm concerned. The same way, I believe peace is too important to be left to politicians and diplomats. And it's our job to put them out of business. Peace concerns each and every one of us. And this peace must originate in our hearts, link up with others, and envelop the whole of humanity. True peace is not secured through war, but through understanding, tolerance, compassion, and love. And all it costs is giving up our ego, selfishness, and self-interest. It doesn't cost big budgets. But are we ready to do that? If we are ready to do that, then let me have the last slide, please. We have a bunch of fragrance sticks, incense sticks, and they all give out their aroma, which can be experienced by everybody. So if we all of us decide to feel peace in our heart and mind, and we combine together, we can really envelop the whole world with peace. And that will be stable peace. It's not just absence of war. So I think it's time to stop being the silent majority, as Lyndon Johnson said, and become the active majority stakeholders. Because you know, how many diplomats and politicians are there? 100,000, 1 million, 2 million, take 10 million. The population of the earth is 6.7 billion. So what is 10 million compared to 6.7 billion? So if we take the management of peace into our hands, we can shut down the United Nations and run the whole world. Thank you. I managed it.
Oh, that was so wonderful. And I'm going to ask our Deputy Director of the Interfaith Centre, Dr. Nicholas Coleman, who's also Head of Religious Studies at Wesley College, to thank Dr. Venkataraman. Thank you.
Well, it's definitely been my pleasure to sit here for the last hour and a half and listen to one of the most amazing integrations of thought and heart and mind that I've heard recently. Thank you very much, Professor Venkataraman, for manifesting, might I say, what I read on a piece of paper that was given to me just an hour before this evening's show. I consider this a selfless service offered to the one who is present within the heart of everyone. That's us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for the opportunity given to me.
Now, we know that you will have some questions for the Professor, and so I just wonder if you would bear with us for a moment so that we can bring a microphone here. And we would ask you that if you have a question, would you like to come forward and please keep your question brief and Professor Venkataraman would be very pleased to respond.
Thank you very much, Professor. My name is Dr. Abdul. I'm a medical doctor, so I'm not a physicist. But it was a really wonderful opportunity to listen and have you here. One thing I was just noting down that, as you said, that the most important component is this to develop peace in individual or himself or herself. But the burning question remains that how to develop it. Can we have peace without having sources from outside? But sources which are given by the Master, our Maker, like messengers. Like messengers from the Master, the prophets. Prophets which came on this earth with from the God are the only source, or available source in the religious world to know more about himself as far as spirituality is concerned. Because science is not God-like, like art. Art can create, but science can only discover. So the artistic part came from the prophets, and prophets are the source to know more about our Maker. So don't you think by believing in them, by understanding them, by taking care of those prophets and messengers of Master, we can easily, build peace in ourselves?
I hope you followed the question. I don't have time to paraphrase it or repeat it. But I would like to say this. In giving this talk, I did not dismiss the Masters. In fact, I quoted one. The Masters have been giving us messages for centuries. All I said was, it's time to pay attention to what the Masters said and take it further, and not simply become repetitive, people who repeat like a tape recorder what the Master said. Time has come to practice what they said, whether it is Jesus Christ or Prophet Muhammad or any one of the other prophets about whom I don't know much, Buddha and so on. Are we doing what they say? Did they ask us to go and kill each other? Where is it said? They didn't say that. Jesus said, love thy neighbor. Are we loving thy neighbor? We don't even know who our neighbor is. In fact, he has answered that question in the parable of the Good Samaritan. How many people know about the Good Samaritan? In New York today, if somebody follows on the pavement, people are busy going. The maximum a Good Samaritan will do is dial 911 and say, there's a guy lying here, send your emergency. The Good Samaritan took time to heal him. We don't have time. We have time to Twitter. We have time for Facebook. But we don't have time to be our brother's keeper.
Have we any other questions? Burning questions?
My question is simple. Peace can be compared to silence. And just like silence cannot be produced, in my opinion, peace cannot be produced. When there's no noise, there is silence. Because silence and peace always exist. Because if no noise, silence is there. So my question is, can we quantify peace? Or can we quantify silence? Is it possible to say peace is not there? Or relatively it's got less peace or more peace. Is it possible to quantify peace?
This is an interesting question. Science leaves us with a passion to quantify. We have to quantify everything these days, including how many people are watching TV and so on. Let me ask you a simple question. Let us say somebody has an orchestra here and plays. People are sitting there and listening. Everybody feels happy. Is it possible to take a meter and measure how happy they feel? That depends on their sense of awareness. A music connoisseur would probably understand the music much better than a novice like me. Beethoven may be played. I feel great. Somebody who has lived with Beethoven all his life, he will feel exhilarated. I don't know what word to use. So there are certain things that are imponderable, not measurable. Peace can be recognized, not merely through the absence of conflict, but through the friendliness, through compassion, through love. So I won't go around measuring peace. I would rather love to see a lot of love exchange and people being happy. That's what is supposed to happen on Christmas Day. Instead, you find people running to shopping mall for bargaining. So let me say, somebody talked about profit. Let us not worry about measuring. Let's just feel happy. That's what was advocated in the song so beautifully. If we just let ourselves go and resonate to that, peace will come. We need not bother about measuring it. Let us experience peace. That's what I would recommend. You may not agree with me, but as one who has been bothered about taking measurements and publishing them, let me get away from it. I will find peace running away from measurements.
Have we any more questions? I think we have time for one more. Or two more, maybe.
Consciousness before the Big Bang. And you talk about the pillars of peace, love and compassion. Are you saying that love and compassion emanates from this consciousness? And are you talking about God? Or that's very confusing for me.
You asked a question, I would have to ask a counter question because we have to first agree on what is God, definition of God. But in an intuitive way, we all agree that God is love and God is compassion. Where love is, God is, said Tolstoy. And all religions say that. In our country, we say, Prem Ishwar hai, Ishwar Prem hai. Love is God, God is love. We may not be able to understand God, but we can understand love. And this love comes from my being conscious that other things are not separate from me. Even science is telling me that. So in a way, God, conscience, consciousness, love, all these things get tied together. But of this chain, I understand love more easily than I understand other things. So if I hang on to love, things sort out. Let me give you can I take a minute to narrate a beautiful story of Tolstoy which sort of answers all these questions? There were two girls in a small town in Russia. They were neighbors. One day, one of these girls had a birthday and her mother dressed her up in a beautiful frock and all that. And these two girls were playing. It had rained before, there was some muddy water, and some muddy water got splashed onto this pretty birthday dress. It was ruined. So this girl came crying to her mother. Her mother went out, scolded the other girl and gave her a slap or two. Promptly her mother came. So this became a fight between two mothers. Then the husbands were dragged in. There became a fight between two husbands and wives on this side and two husband and wife on that side. Slowly the village which came to watch the fun got entangled. There was a big fight. There was an old man living in the village who had gone to a neighboring village. As he came to his village, he saw a big commotion. So he made his way and asked, what's happening? So everybody began telling their own story. This lady started it. No, this lady started. This man hit my wife. So on and so forth. Then he said, is that so? Just 1 minute. Please come with me. He took them some distance. He said, see there. Those two girls were playing. He said, they have forgotten what they were quarreling about. What are you quarreling about? So I see, the essential point is they had sunk their differences and began to love each other. So I would say you are quite right. In my view, in the view of many people, love is God and God is love. And that comes when I become conscious of other people, their pain, suffering, and I become I understand they and I are not different. They are one. Even science says we are one. When I realize all these things, love dominates, compassion dominates, and peace is also accessible. I hope I have sufficiently confused you.
And I think you have a question.
I really enjoyed your talk, sir. I'm a student of science. I was a student of science. This question arises from an argument I had with a friend when I was a student. Science teaches us to ask questions, whereas spirituality asks us to have faith. Where does the questioning end and where does the faith start? I had a question about God and His existence, with a passionate argument with a friend, and the argument is still continuing when we have passed our college days and we are married and we are settled. Now, we still continue our argument over Facebook and Twitter whenever this question comes.
I can give a long talk on this, but I assure you I don't wish to. Your question was precisely answered by Professor Charles Towns of Columbia University, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the laser principle and building the first maser. This, by the way, is what a laser does. This is based on the laser, and we owe this to the discovery of Professor Charles Towns. He made a very simple statement. Science explains the why of the universe. Religion explains the how of the universe. That's all. So, we are talking about two different aspects of the universe, and there is no need for a conflict. And incidentally, Francis Collins, a very distinguished molecular biologist, was appointed head of the Human Genome Commission in America. They spent years, lot of billions of dollars, and ultimately completely decoded the human genome. It was a great achievement. Francis Collins was a non-believer when he started the project. At the end of the project, when he saw the human genome before him, he was astounded. He said, there is some other power in charge. And he became a firm believer and a good Christian. So, we need not think that science and spirituality or science and religion are complementary. Abdus Salam of Pakistan, who won the Nobel Prize along with Steven Weinberg and Sheldon Glashow for their electroweak unification, was asked, Professor, you are a scientist, nuclear scientist. How can you be a religious man? He was a very pious man. I have met him. He's a pious man. He said, it's very simple. Universe is about that world. Spirituality is about this world. Where is the problem? So, we need not think there is a problem. And I have quoted 3 scientists.
I think there's just one final question.
My name is Sharma, and I am an engineer by profession.
Engineer?
Yeah. What is a subconscious state? Is it an extension of quantum mechanics? And how do we progress our journey from subconscious state to consciousness?
You are asking questions to which I do not know the answer. To talk about subconscious and conscious, I have to be at least a psychologist. As far as quantum mechanics is concerned, none of the hard-boiled quantum mechanics will talk about consciousness because, then they will not be part of the establishment. It is not very fashionable to talk about consciousness in science. Those people who talk about it are very serious people. They are not bothered about funding and peer review and all that. They are transcended. They are frontier thinkers. They are not bothered about their peer rating. But hardcore scientists have said, in our heart of hearts, we would like to ask these questions, but we will be poo-pooed and debunked if we talk about this. But people like Freeman Dyson of Princeton University openly talks about consciousness. He writes about it and speculates about it. He has even written a paper in the Reviews of Modern Physics, very prestigious journal. So, but we still do not know enough to talk about connecting consciousness to quantum mechanics. The only thing we know is there is this quantum entanglement, and many people have said that gives a hint to consciousness. Not a very detailed hint, but a very subtle hint. Many years ago, Eugene Wigner, whose picture I showed, said, at the end of the day, what is physical reality? Physical reality is what we cognize. We observe, the information goes into the brain and is complete when it is registered in our consciousness. He was the first scientist to use the word consciousness apart from Schrodinger. So, in the days to come, in the years to come, people may talk about this. I won't live to see this. But it's quite likely that science will get integrated with consciousness. Quantum mechanics may get integrated with consciousness for a simple reason that quantum mechanics starts with an observer. Heisenberg said, I will talk only about observables. For there to be observables, there must be an observer. So what is the role of observer in quantum mechanics? That's not yet been defined still. When that gets defined, the connection between consciousness and quantum mechanics may get clarified better. That is my expectation. And I think I will be proved true, though I may not live to see it.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much
you so
again,
much.
Professor Venkataraman.
I'm glad for rescuing me. Thank you.
And may I ask Auntie Helen to, we have a little gift for you, to share something about Australia with you.
I already have the love of Australia and the heart of Australia.
Thank you.
And there are so many people to thank, and I'm going to do that now before we go on to the next part. But I just wanted to thank so much Dr. Raman Kusal and all of the team who helped volunteering to make this evening possible, and St Michael's Church for sharing with us this beautiful venue, and to my board members who've also supported this event so well.